There used to be a bit of a debate in the past when environmental issues were first being raised, that there were those that loved the environment and liked plants and trees and things. And it was seen as, oh, well, they're maybe quite middle class and comfortable and can afford to be interested in nature and the environment and might live in the countryside in beautiful places. But that the poverty agenda was something entirely different. And I think Pope Francis has blended the two together. He has said in his wonderful encyclical that's gone much wider than the church, Laudato Si, the most popular encyclical ever, care for the poor, care for the earth, go together hand in hand. And I think at the present time, because of concerns about what's called the transition, how to change from a carbon economy dependent on oil and gas and cars and a high lifestyle and the chimera of eternal growth, that it's too painful to rethink. And of course, some people will have to pay and make sacrifices to rebalance the world, not least in favour of those who are the poor and the least. And I think at the present time, the cost of living crisis is being used as an excuse to say, well, because a kind of equalisation, if it was simple, would simply mean that the poor pay the highest price, therefore we're not doing it, is not the right equation. And so I think there's a split occurring now to say we can't be involved in the environmental agenda because the challenges will hit the poor. Well, interestingly, during the original sin of austerity, the poor were not central to the concerns then as they should have been, and now they're suddenly becoming central, but it's a false concern for the poor. And I think to have the right dialogue is to refocus on the common good. And as Pope Francis says, and as he said it during the pandemic, he said, we did for a short while realise that we were all in the same boat. And he said, hope we're not deluded enough to forget that and pretend that we can simply going back to more of the same.
Do you feel that the bishops in England and Wales and Scotland have been strong enough in their advocacy on these issues, or do you think they need to make their voice louder?
I do, and I think in a way the Catholic Church was exemplary during COVID. And in my own city of Leeds, it was the Catholic parishes, the SVP nationally and in our parishes, that went out setting up food banks, going around the houses, talking to people through their windows, visiting people where they could. And I'm a massive fan of St. Catherine of Siena. She walked round during plague times, that wonderful woman. She wasn't a scholar. She prayed and then went out to help the poor during the plague of the Middle Ages. But she also developed into a woman who then went and prodded the Pope and said, what are you doing in Avignon? Get back to Rome. She also went and prodded the Emperor and said, what do you think you're doing the way you're carrying on in your power play? So she took a courageous challenge to the powers that be and was outspoken. She's now a doctor of the church. And I think the church has to take more risks in speaking truth to power and not imagining that in the present world it can all be done behind the scenes. And I think the people are really desperate at these times where fear, pessimism and despair is being propagated as a political tool that we need our hopes to be encouraged. And I think that is a vital role for the leadership of the church. And I don't just apply it to bishops and priests, but to the laity as well. And perhaps that can come through the voice of our development of a synodal church.
Why do you believe an SDG unit at the Cabinet Office would be a good thing?
Well, the Cabinet Office is where all the real decisions are being made. Clearly, it's at the heart of the decision-making process. And if the SDGs are as important as the government claimed them to be, then really that's the department that should house the SDGs. And all of the information relative to the SDGs should come from that department. Clearly, they will come with instructions. Clearly, the message will come down through the other departments. And all messaging and everything that has to, all of the important news and headlines that are to come from the SDGs should come from the Cabinet Office. Part of the issue that we have at the moment is that they were with the Department for International Development, which was disappeared. And we also feel that so too has the message of the SDGs. The department had an expertise, they had an experience, they were able to do their work clearly, it was very obvious what they were doing, and they were interested and they could achieve. And the UK government were champions of the SDGs and continue to claim that they are champions of the SDGs. If the UK government really want to champion the SDGs, then they need to put it front and centre. They need to give it that place of prominence. And the place of prominence is to make it or help it to belong in the Cabinet Office.
You're also calling on the government to commit to a second voluntary national review. What would that achieve?
Well, the voluntary national review is the process by which the government can declare how well they are implementing or how far short they are falling in terms of their SDG promise. Every country, as part of their SDG promise, has signed up to deliver a voluntary national review. Most countries are on their second, if not third. Some countries want to do their fourth, but have been told to hold back because some countries are so far behind. Clearly the thinking is to leave no one behind, and that's exactly what the SDGs insist upon. So from our point of view, we would hope that the 2019 voluntary national review that was delivered at the UN, we would hope that that baseline report would be repeated in terms of a second voluntary national review, and in this instance we will be able to measure the difference between what was then and what is now, and we can look at how far short we are falling of our promise, who it is exactly that is being left behind, and what we can do to make the difference in order to roll out the proper SDG promise as we made that convicted promise in 2015.
There's a suggestion that Catholic social teaching actually goes further than the SDGs. Do you believe that?
I think I do believe that. The SDGs are a plan for everybody, and one of their key principles is that they are universal. They apply to everybody, but not just everybody on our planet. They apply to every place too, but they also apply to people who have not yet been born. But if the SDGs apply to absolutely everybody, then clearly what we're hoping is that it's a framework. It can be a little bit abstract. It sounds quite simple, but in actual fact, to develop the solutions and the mechanisms by which we can transform this SDG plan into, or to operationalize it, to localize it, we need perhaps something new, something different. And what we were given at the same time as the SDGs was Laudato Si, a gift from the Pope. It was no accident that Pope Francis turned up on the 25th of September 2015 to deliver the SDGs, to announce the SDGs. He brought with him Laudato Si, which was published 3 months earlier. 3 months after that, it was the Paris COP climate. So 2015 was a seminal year. We genuinely believe that with the moral obligation, the moral charter that is set out in Laudato Si, that we have a Catholic social teaching base upon which we can help to implement the SDGs at home and abroad, because our implementation of these SDGs is about a sibling responsibility to those who are furthest behind, in the sense that we will make sure that we will do whatever we can to ensure that those who can't, can.